So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions, after a very impressive home victory versus the, at the time, 2-0 Atlanta Falcons, have a quick turnaround this week as they fly out to Lambeau Field to play on primetime Thursday night football versus the division rival Green Bay Packers. Now, this matchup would have stakes no matter what the records were, but with both the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers being off to hot starts in the 2023 season, this game is not only for division bragging rights, not only to get a leg up on your opponent, but to get sole control and sole advantage of the race for the NFC North crown. The Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers are both 2-1. Both of them look very strong to start the season, and both of them are looking to get that extra game and a half advantage over the clear other rival for the crown this season. So today, I want to take a look at the matchups. I want to take a look at matchups on both sides of the ball, look at the strengths and weaknesses of both teams, and eventually take a look at which team should be the inevitable victor of Thursday Night Football and which team will go into Week 5 with a clear advantage in the race for the crown. So let's get into it. Taking a look at how both teams got here. Both teams are 2-1. The Detroit Lions got off to a hot start on Thursday Night Football to open the season with a big 1-point victory over the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead. They then return home to the Seattle Seahawks, where they dropped a game by 6 points in overtime. It was a game that the Detroit Lions very clearly could have won, but some crucial mistakes kept them from winning that contest. However, they bounced back a week later. At home versus a hot 2-0 Atlanta Falcons team, they held them to just 6 points offensively while taking a huge victory at home versus an NFC contender, at least an NFC South contender, a playoff contender, especially for the NFC South division, while taking a strong victory there, putting them at 2-1. A decisive victory, a close loss, and a very close, hard-fought victory. How the Detroit Lions got to 2-1, well, the Green Bay Packers got there a little bit differently. The Packers also opened their season on the road. They had a huge victory in Week 1 versus the division rival Chicago Bears, putting them in the lead for the division right now with a 1-0 division record, while everybody else is at 0-0. They then went to Atlanta in Week 2 and suffered a 1-point loss at the hands of Desmond Ridder, Bijan Robinson, and the Atlanta Falcons. They came back home last weekend versus the, again, 2-0 New Orleans Saints, but unfortunately, they got a close victory, getting a 1-point victory, 18-17 over the New Orleans Saints as well. Now, that game did have a little bit of luck to it. That game, of course, saw Derek Carr leave early in the third quarter with their backup quarterback the entire second half. Saints did not score a point in the second half and, of course, missed the potential game-winning field goal for the victory there. But a hard-fought game by the Green Bay Packers, a fourth-quarter comeback by Jordan Love. The Packers are sitting at 2-1, ready to host Thursday Night Football. Taking a look at the Detroit Lions so far, I think they've been the more impressive team this year. The Detroit Lions ranked 12th offensively in the NFL as far as points scored. They rank 6th among NFL teams in passing statistics, while they rank 11th in the NFL as a rushing offense. Their offense was top 5 a season ago in points scored. Hasn't quite been that dynamic this year, but they've put up enough points to be 2-1. They've put up enough points to keep them in every single game that they have played. And their offense, despite not being as high-flying as it was last year, is still a very strong offense, missing several key pieces. Now, I think the big upgrades this year on the defensive side of the ball are working for the Detroit Lions. They rank currently 16th in the NFL in points allowed. They rank 21st versus the pass, but they rank 6th, top 10 and almost top 5 in rushing defense. They held Bijan Robinson to just 33 rushing yards a week ago. They have not allowed a 100-yard rusher in almost 13 or at least 12 of the last 13 games, and they have been a great run defending team for the better half of a year, and almost the better part of a full NFL season at this point. The offense is high scoring, it is efficient, and it will keep the Detroit Lions in games. And the defense has been in a position to stop the run, force long passes, and has put the Detroit Lions in a situation to gain victories as well. Now, the Green Bay Packers are surprisingly good, but also surprisingly bad at the same time. The Green Bay Packers currently rank 7th in the NFL in scoring offense, but despite that, they rank as just the 19th passing offense in the NFL and the 24th rushing offense in the NFL. They haven't been very efficient in between the 20s, but they've been very efficient in the red zone. They've scored a lot of points, they've forced a number of turnovers, and they've taken advantage of points off those turnovers. On defense, they've been right around average, ranking slightly above the Detroit Lions in points allowed at 15th. It is a 1-point difference between how many points the Packers have allowed and the Detroit Lions have allowed. They rank 12th versus the pass and 28th versus the run. Now, both teams have been struggling with quite a few injuries, so both teams, you could argue, could be better at their respective statistics, but that is where both teams sit right now. And without a clear injury report going into this game yet, we're not sure who's going to be active and who's going to be healthy, so we're not sure if we're going to see Green Bay with Jair Alexander, Aaron Jones, and Christian Watson, or if we're going to see the Detroit Lions with Taylor Decker, David Montgomery, as well as Emmanuel Mosley and Halapaloi Vaitai. Both teams are missing crucial players on both sides of the ball, and that's been something they've had to deal with, but something they've dealt with very well so far. Taking a look at the matchups, this is for the Detroit Lions offensive side of the ball, and I think they match up really well versus the Green Bay Packers. Even with a depleted offensive line, I think Dan Skaper should be ready to go this week, if nothing else, and Matt Nelson hopefully is ready to return if he can do so. If Taylor Decker is unavailable, we should at least have those two guys back, meaning I think the Detroit Lions offensive line is better than the Packers defensive line. I know they put a lot of stock into their defensive line. I'm aware that the Packers defensive line is actually quite underrated in the NFL and I think is very good, but the Detroit Lions offensive line, especially when healthy, has been one of the premier lines over the last 3 seasons, really even going back a little bit farther than that. If Taylor Decker is healthy and the starting offensive line looks like Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, and Penei Sewell back at right tackle, I think they have the clear advantage against the Packers defensive line. But if there is injuries and they do continue to arise, and it goes Penei Sewell, it goes Penei Sewell, it goes Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, and then you have Colby Sorsdale on that line, or you have even Dan Skipper on that line, I think it becomes a little bit more of a threat. But as long as they have at least Matt Nelson or Dan Skipper, I do think the offensive line is going to take advantage and put the Lions in a good position and keep Jared Goff relatively clean in the pocket. The Packers DBs, especially with Jair Alexander having some injury issues at this point, I do think the wide receivers are going to be able to separate. I do think Jared Goff is going to be able to move the football around. I don't think the Packers are necessarily a more talented secondary than the Seattle Seahawks or a more talented secondary than the Atlanta Falcons. Both of those teams have great secondary members, and I think the Lions DBs, I think the Lions wide receivers did a good job versus both teams, getting open, creating separation, and giving Jared Goff windows to throw. Sam Laporta is the biggest mismatch in this game. I think that he is going to match up very well versus their linebackers. Quay Walker is very good. Their linebacking core in general is very strong, but Sam Laporta has gone up versus some really good linebackers this year and has dominated all of them. I would expect at least 5 more catches for the rookie and another big day through the air, as well as contributing to the ground game. However, I do think the Packers linebackers will outmatch the Detroit Lions running backs, especially if David Montgomery is a no-go. If David Montgomery misses his 2nd game in a row, I do think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have some trouble breaking free. As I said, the Packers have a very strong linebacking core with Quay Walker, with, I believe, Devontae Campbell is in there as well, I believe is his name. They have a very strong linebacking core. They're fast, they're aggressive, they tackle really well, they hit really well, and they cover really well. So I think they're going to be a tough matchup for Jahmyr Gibbs and Zonovan Knight if David Montgomery can't return. David Montgomery makes that matchup a little more even, but I'd still slightly lean towards the linebackers of Green Bay. Taking a look at the offensive side for the Packers, I do think the Packers offensive line, again, especially when healthy, is going to outperform the Detroit Lions defensive line. Last year in Week 18, the Lions defensive line was able to generate some pressure, especially with the blitz packages they dialed up. But outside of Aiden Hutchinson, I still think we're lacking that premier edge rusher on the other side. I do think the Packers should be able to keep Jordan Love relatively clean, especially with his improvisation that he's shown so far. Wide receivers, I don't think the Packers wide receivers are all that good. I don't think they create separation at a super high level, especially without Christian Watson. They've making some tough catches against some really talented secondaries. They played really well versus the Saints in that second half, but I do think our DBs are good enough to take on whatever the Packers have to throw at us from a wide receiver standpoint. So I'm very excited to see that matchup as well. Tight ends, I think the Packers have some underrated tight ends. They're big, they're fast, they're long, they're really good receivers. And if our linebackers have struggled with anything this year, it has been covering the tight end. I think that the linebackers are talented enough to do so, but I think the scheme is kind of hurting them a little bit in that perspective. I do think the tight ends could have a big day versus the Detroit Lions linebackers that, again, gave up big plays to Kyle Pitts, gave up big plays to Noah Fant, gave up big plays to even Noah Gray going back all the way to Kansas City. Linebackers have struggled versus tight ends, and I think that trend might continue with the very talented field stretching tight ends that the Green Bay Packers have. But I think our linebackers match up really well versus their running backs, especially if Aaron Jones is a no-go. I don't think that A.J. Dillon is necessarily a great running back. I think he's a solid goal line back. He's a solid backup running back. But if he's the premier guy, I don't think the rushing attack is going to be very strong for you, especially knowing that the Detroit Lions are great at stopping the run this year and the Packers are not great at running the ball. I think that will be the Detroit Lions' biggest advantage, getting the Packers into third and long, forcing Jordan Love to throw, hopefully getting a little bit of pressure and getting off the field with their stout run defense. Now, taking a look at the factors of this game. Obviously, the Packers have home field advantage, but neither team is really getting an advantage when it comes to rest. Both teams played on Sunday at 1 o'clock, so they're playing pretty much even schedules at this point. Both teams have the same amount of preparation, same amount of rest time, so that doesn't really factor into this game. Injuries, I think the Packers have the advantage. The Detroit Lions have a lot more significant injuries than the Green Bay Packers. They're missing several pieces of their offensive line. They're missing their starting running back. They're missing and have had injuries at their wide receiving core, their secondary, their defensive line, everything and anything the Detroit Lions can have has been pretty much taken away from them. So I think the Packers have a little bit of an advantage there. They can take advantage of some of the injuries the Lions have. But again, this is pretty close with Jair Alexander, Aaron Jones, and of course, Christian Watson all missing last week's contest. QB, I think the Detroit Lions have the better quarterback. Jared Goff has been playing at a super high level this year, especially when the Detroit Lions have been able to keep him clean in the pocket. He has been a very confident thrower. He's put the football in good situations. And last week, it got a little bit dicey as the right side of the offensive line really started to struggle down to their fourth string right tackle. But when the pocket was clean, when the offensive line was healthy, Jared Goff was dealing against some really strong secondaries, some really good pass rushes. And I do think they have the best quarterback in this matchup. However, don't sleep on Jordan Love. Jordan Love is a very talented young quarterback. He's really good at extending the plays, really good at improvising on the move. And although he's not a perfect quarterback by any means, he could give the Detroit Lions some fits as far as escaping the pocket and avoiding pressures and sacks. I think the Detroit Lions are the more talented roster. They've had more convincing victories, and they've had victories versus better opponents. I think this game is going to be really close. I think it's going to be low scoring, slugfest. I think both teams are going to look to run the ball. I think one team's going to have more success than the other, but I don't think either team is going to run the ball especially effective. I think both pass rushes are going to be able to get some pressure. And I think that both quarterbacks are going to end up missing some throws, especially if the elements start playing a factor. However, in the end, I do think the Detroit Lions, being the more talented team and hopefully bringing back guys like Kirby Joseph and Taylor Decker this week, are going to squeak out a very close division win, 23-21, in a very similar game to what we saw last year at Lambeau Field. Dan Campbell is 3-1 versus the Green Bay Packers, including 1-1 at Lambeau Field, 2-0 at Ford Field. He has had the Packers number over the last two seasons, and really, the Packers have only won one half of football versus the Detroit Lions over the last two seasons. The Lions are a very talented football team. I think they're a more talented football team. And I think in a close, low-scoring, defensive Thursday night football game, the Detroit Lions will take advantage of a couple extra opportunities and take the game 23-21. With that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think score-wise this game is going to look like. Do you think the Lions are going to take it, or do you think the Green Bay Packers are going to take back control of the North and kind of put things back to how they've been for the last couple of years? I'd be very curious to hear what you guys think about this matchup and who you think is going to walk out as the victor. But with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.